My guest today is someone who has shaped how Britain and much of the world thinks about design. Stephen Bayley is a critic, author, and the founding director of the Design Museum. Across 5 decades, he's written, curated, and argued his way into becoming one of design's most provocative and influential voices. He helped make design a public conversation, not a specialist pursuit, first through the Boilerhouse project at the V&A, and later by turning that experiment into the Design Museum itself. Bayley's views on taste, value, and beauty, and to be precise, vulgarity, have challenged orthodoxy and reshaped how we understand culture as commerce. His books and columns have frankly taken aim at everything from cars to cities, with an eye trained on what objects say about the societies that make them. Today, we're going to talk about how luxury lost its manifesto and what makes good taste a curse, and frankly, why ugliness might just be design's last act of honesty. Stephen, welcome to What the Luxe. It's a joy.
Well, it's great and fun to be here, and I'm glad not to be described as a ubiquitous know-it-all, as I was recently on another similar occasion.
Stephen, give us the life story. What drew you to design? What is it?
Well, I think it was a number of different things. When I didn't even call it design. I grew up in Liverpool. Not in any sort of reduced circumstances myself. My parents are perfectly sort of well off, middle class, suburban managerial types. But growing up in Liverpool, you can't not notice the architecture. There was great architecture there. Liverpool's got more monuments than by ratio than London. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it's also got some of the most appalling slums in the world. And something before I knew the word design, something made me realize as a small child that you could take one arrangement of concrete and steel and glass and bricks and whatever and make it into something wonderful which improved your life and made things better, or you could do it very badly and make people's life worse. And since then I've always been obsessed by that idea of being able to improve the environment. It's one of the reasons I think, for instance, that architecture is far more important than politics, because buildings can't lie, and politicians lie all the time. And buildings last longer than politicians do. That was one thing. So just it was the mood and the romance and the atmosphere of Liverpool. Some beautiful places and some horrible places. Maybe I didn't know what design meant. The second thing was my father used to work in an aerospace factory, and he used to take me around, looked at machine tools at the weekend, and I was very seduced as a child by the sort of inevitable beauty of a functional object. A bit of an aeroplane. And my father always used to quiz me as a child. It's something which now ineradicable in me. He always used to ask me, wherever we were, how is this made? We're looking at a chair or a door or a building or a car or a piece of machinery. He said, has it been forged? Was it milled? Was it cast? Was it fabricated? And that sensibility has been with me ever, because I believe that if you can understand how something is made, you understand everything about it. I think it's very important. That was the second thing. The third thing was just an idea related to the first about the different effects architecture can have to a continuous source. I don't know quite why it happened, but it did, and it does, and it continues. I've always thought we've got to find the ways and means of making things better, more beautiful and more useful. I don't know quite how, but I think we must always be in that pursuit. And the fourth reason I became interested in what we now call design was, I suppose, covetousness, just wanting to have as many nice things as possible. And my motivations from childhood have remained since. I do think it's possible with to make the world a better, more interesting, more agreeable place.
How did that sort of curiosity in design contribute towards your career?
Oh, my career was just absolute. It's like a disaster movie. I mean, I went to I intended to be an architect, but I felt that when I was that age, student age, you still had to be good at maths and drawing. And I wasn't particularly good at maths, and I wasn't particularly good at drawing. And I've always, frankly, only ever wanted to do things I felt I could, excel at. So I switched from doing architecture to doing history of art, which I felt was like doing architecture without the difficult stuff like drawings and maths. And I just remember being I was very interested in history of art. I always loved paintings, and I used to haunt the art galleries at Liverpool when I was a child. I can remember being in a lecture in Manchester, which is where I went to study, one wet, miserable, afternoon. in a weekday afternoon in the seminar room, and some noble, toiling lecturer was telling us about the importance of Baroque painting in 17th century Bologna. And I thought this is absolutely fabulous. I love this. I nothing like better than a 17th century Bolognese Baroque painting. I just wish I was in Bologna to enjoy it. But then I was looking out the window, the dreary Manchester streetscape outside, I kept on thinking, why isn't he telling us about why Manchester looks the way it does? And so what I suppose you could do, just in sort of academic terms, I turned the study of the history of art into studying the history of design, the study of ordinary things, which is basically what I do. And I've always believed that, while I don't take second place to anybody in my appreciation of the great masterpieces of world art, I've always believed fundamentally that the artistic sensibility doesn't end at the front door of art galleries. It's just what you've got to do is have an art critic's aesthetic judgment of everyday life. I believe everyday life is, well, obviously everyday life is very important. I mean, I'm often mocked for saying I care about the shape and character of teapots, which I don't much because I don't drink tea. But it's a trope which people often used about me. But I do care. But if you don't care about the everyday things, what on earth will you care about?
I couldn't agree more with that. I sort of obsess over sort of buying a kettle.
Yeah,
it took me months.
Well, why would you not? You live with one lives with these things. One lives with these choices. You may as well make the best of it. And that's the great beauty for me about design. I mean, I am quite an elitist really, because I always believe that life should be on, about gradients. One's in one place and one wants to be in a different place, possibly higher, occasionally lower. But so I am an elitist. But I think the great thing about design, which separates it in many ways from the conventional masterpieces of art, the great thing about design is it can be made widely available and inexpensively, and you can appreciate beauty can be democratized, which I suppose is a way of describing what design is about.
Stephen, can you talk us through your career highlights? and
that won't take very long. You'll sure to ask me something else.
I'm interested in what you've done, and then I'd like to come to what you've written.
Well, my career highlight, the first career highlight, was managing not to get expelled thrown out of university after my first year, which was a strong possibility because I did quite well at quite a good school, and I was extremely lazy. I worked very hard at things I liked doing, and not at all hard at things I didn't like doing, which got me, which allowed me to survive, indeed flourish at school. But I went to quite a competitive university where it was full of people exactly like me, who also done really quite well at school. So I very nearly failed to last the first year. And then suddenly I realized that I could best the system. Like Bach once said, anybody could have written what I've written if they'd worked as hard. And I just realized that I could actually, because I've got quite a good memory, I just determined to read more than anybody else. And I did. But I only ever at university, I only ever read in some daylight hours because I liked having my amusements in the evening. But I've always been an early riser as well. But I've always, I never did any work after about 5 o'clock at university. So surviving university and doing surprisingly well there. That was the first career thing. Then I got a job teaching in a university, which was another surprise. And I wanted to teach, what I now became known as design. And in those days, there were almost no books about the subject. I mean, there were sort of dutiful books about William Morris and the arts and crafts movement and that sort of thing. But no one had written a book which looked at the ordinary world and treated it seriously. I mean, cars and ordinary furniture and pens and cameras and that sort of thing. And I needed a book for the students, and there wasn't one, so I wrote one, which was called In Good Shape, and that was published in 1979. And that was one of the, pivot is an overused word nowadays, but that was a genuine pivot in my existence when this book came out, because it was widely reported, because people came up to me, and part of the thesis and the PR, we used to do this sort of things. Don't tell me someone designed that. And we take it as a commonplace nowadays. You and I know that someone made a decision about what that should be. So, no, well, pen. I said, don't tell me you're talking about a pen in the same way as you might talk about a work of art. I say, yes, you can, because someone somewhere made a decision about what it should look like. And that might be a lower order decision than the Sistine Chapel. But it's the same sort of, it's in the same sort of thing. So that was the first. And that book got noticed by Terence Conran, who at the time was very well known as a entrepreneur of design retail shops called Habitat, which helped change Britain's taste. Terence noticed the book and said, "Come to see me." And he said, I was then a very, very young university teacher, used to travelling at the back of planes, and Terence gave me a little bit of money and said, so I started travelling nearer to the middle of planes. And he said, "I want to do something for students today, what the V&A did for me when I was young," which in Terence's case gave him an ample source of things to copy. But I literally went around the world making sure that no one else wanted to do something like a museum of design, not like the V&A, but I mean a museum which had cars, cameras, more stuff in it. No one was, and the first thing we actually found, we actually found a site in Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes, laugh at it now, but it's an idealistic project I actually rather enjoy, and I think it's a great success. But we had a site there, and this is the vision we had, was that somewhere in Milton Keynes we would build a sort of warehouse-like thing. It's 1978 I'm talking about now, a warehouse-like thing which would have sort of primitive robots getting objects off shelves so students could study them. And funnily enough, that's actually now come to pass, because the V&A East recently opened in London is doing exactly that. They've got all the storerooms of the V&A, put them in there, and you can just go and you can now book online, and of course you can now haul an object off the shelf and study it. So that's actually happened. But we didn't build in Milton Keynes because Roy Strong, who was then director of the V&A, found out what we were doing, and with his characteristic mixture of style, generosity, and athletic opportunism, said to Terence and me, "Why didn't you get started here?" And so we built what became known as the Boilerhouse project, called the Boilerhouse because it was literally in the old Boilerhouse yard of the V&A, where the old central heating equipment was, and we liked the name Boilerhouse because it sounded like a garbled version of Bauhaus, but also Boilerhouse suggested the sort of the ferment of useful industrial activity. And we put on a very popular series of exhibitions throughout the mid-80s, and it sort of made design. Sorry, it sounds like shocking bullshit, but you said it before yourself. It was, whether I was the cause of it or a symptom of it, I don't know. But the Boilerhouse did make design into a commonplace. I mean, before the 1980s, if design was mentioned at all in newspapers, it was only mentioned really on the women's page when they were discussing macrame and knitting. So that was and that's then. We built the original design museum after that. So that was a career high. There was a career low soon followed, as the career lows do. When I flounced out of the design museum, having on the basis really all sorts of things happened. But I think in general, the general truth that people who start businesses shouldn't run them. I like starting a business because I've got energy and ideas, but that's not what you need. If you're running a business, you need discipline and a total focus. I haven't got discipline or focus. I've got a lot of energy and a very good wide-angle lens, but I haven't got a. So that was a low
instinct and impulse to operations and rigor.
Yeah.
Horrific.
Can't do it. I simply can't do it. So I let other people do that. Then I had a moderately prosperous period as an advisor to some big companies, Ford, Coca-Cola, and a few others. And then I suppose my biggest career high or low was I got a call one day in the late 1990s, just as the new Blair government was coming in, and somebody was one of the directors of Saatchi & Saatchi, an Australian rascal called Bill Muirhead, said, "Have you heard about the Millennium Project?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I've heard what I know what I've read in newspapers and nothing else." He said, "Well, it needs a creative director. Would you like to be the creative director of the Millennium?" And I said, I was sitting at my desk in my office in Chelsea doing not much more than looking out the window at the time. I said, that sounds very interesting. Let me think about it. This is on a Friday. I'll come back to you next week. And I went home and told my wife that somebody who I vaguely knew, this man from Saatchi & Saatchi, said, "Would I like to be creative director of this unknown project called the Millennium?" And she said, "You've got to be out of your mind to do this." She already sensed the political and practical horrors of doing it. So naturally, I went on Monday and I called and said, "Yes, of course I'll do it." And it introduced me to I think one of the worst sort of practical, aesthetic, and philosophical, moral, and political disasters I've ever experienced. They had £1 billion to spend on doing something interesting, and I had a few ideas. I also asked a lot of interesting people for ideas, all of which were rejected. One of the things I said was, look, they already had some plans on the table for what became the millennium. And I said, look, but these are just awful. To stop now. Just let's have a little sort of little moratorium. Give me a moment. We've got plenty of money. In any project, any project, you've either got time and money. If you've got a lot of money, you don't need so much time. If you haven't got much money, you need a lot of time. We had a lot of money, but not much time. So look, moratorium. Let me go around the world and speak to some interesting people. I'll go and speak to some Susan Sontag. I'll go and speak to Umberto Eco. I'll go and speak to whoever I can think of who might have some ideas what we might do. And they said, oh, we can't have any foreigners involved.
Right.
And I said, this is the millennium, for the millennium of our era, in London, one of the world capitals. And you're telling me we can't have foreigners involved. And it just all got worse from there. I asked David Hockney what we should do with the Millennium Dome. David said we should just leave it empty, which I thought was a brilliant idea. Just people could just go in there and enjoy the space. We might have light and music or something. But every single another idea I had. Remember, the budget was £1 billion. I said, okay, another thing we could do. We could find 100 really interesting people, designers, filmmakers, painters, whatever, and I could give them £1 million each and say the brief is simple: astonish me.
Yeah.
And we could do that. I said, no, we can't do that. Okay, so the next thing we could do, we could go to every museum in the world and say, lend us for London in the millennium 2000, lend us your greatest masterpiece.
Yeah.
And we'll put them in this place for a year. We could have done that. No, we can't do that. It'd be too difficult. Third thing, that was anyway, the last, probably the worst thing aspect of it all was, okay, I said, okay, we're going to get a lot of visitors here. We'll need some food. They'll need food and drink. And this is when the farmers' market movement was just beginning to get off, get going in this country. And I said, look, it's a fantastic opportunity. We could have farmers' market types selling good, wholesome food and drink. Which would be a fantastic commercial opportunity for them. It would be an education for the public, and it would be a very virtuous way of spending some of our budget. Everybody would enjoy it. It would have an economic benefit, a cultural benefit, and a gastronomic benefit. They said no, and they gave the catering contract to McDonald's.
No.
Yeah. And so that was the quality of reasoning.
What did happen with it all?
He went to McDonald's. McDonald's had the catering contract for the millennium. The very last thing was why I actually ended up leaving was they said you'll need some graphics too, because every project needs a graphic identity.
Yeah.
And I commissioned a man called Alan Fletcher, the late Alan Fletcher, who was unquestionably one of the outstanding graphic designers of the era, really at world class. And Alan was paid a very substantial fee, did some superb work, absolutely superb. And part of my brief to him was the millennium it'll need a graphic identity. I'm not using the word logo, but you know what I mean. It'll need a graphic identity which will work on a lapel pin, it'll work on a T-shirt, it'll work on he did fabulous work. I presented it to the whole board of the Millennium Company, and which was then chaired by Robert Ayling, who was chairman of British Airways at the time, and a serious, very serious business figure. Board loved it. Bob Ayling said, "Fantastic, Stephen, brilliant stuff. Let's go ahead, do it." We paid Alan Fletcher. Peter Mandelson then took without asking anybody, took the drawings off. And this sounds fantastic, but it's true. He took these drawings off to a focus group in Northern Ireland. And it was a group of people, a focus group, and using the techniques which normally the focus groups do. You like this sort of yogurt or that sort of yogurt? Showed them this amazing collection of graphics. And this focus group in Northern Ireland said this graphic device created by this genius of graphic design, they said it looked like a map of the British Isles, but without Ireland on it, which it didn't like anything of the sort. So then Mandy said, "No, we can't do it." And I said, "Well, we've just paid the world's most famous graphic designer, a huge amount of money to this. The board has just," and that was no. And so that was a career low, and since then I've been in continuous descent until I got here today.
It's a career peak.
This is my real high.
You sort of helped Britain discover let's call it sort of design conscious in the 80s. And it feels like design suddenly plays a far more important role in life and business, actually. How have you seen it all evolve over the last few
Well,
decades?
do you know, I don't repudiate my my shambolic career or my personal interests at all, but I think it's up to a point. It's all over. I think now that we're leaving the analog era, I think the analog, the analog era will return in a different form. We can see that what we call design with a capital D was really just one of the last great art movements, with a historic beginning and a historic end, almost as precise as say Baroque or Renaissance,
Yeah.
and that's what it was. It was, we see someone like Dieter Rams and Ettore Sottsass. Dieter Rams being the white and black box German maestro, Ettore Sottsass being the funky, Italian shaman. We see them as very different. They're not. They're just expressions of the same thing. They were giving form and meaning to everyday products in very different styles. But design with a capital D had a beginning and an end, and we're at its end now because people don't really.
Why do you think it's finished?
Well, almost all things pass. People no longer care. So the analog era is over. Well, just for the moment, people no longer care about possessions. I mean, for me, as I said at the very beginning of our conversation, part of my interest in design was a sort of covetousness. I wanted to have the best furniture and a nice car and and the rest of it. I don't think that sensibility is so widespread anymore. Certainly not amongst younger people. And something else. One of the causes of this was the way the word in the past century, also, when I said the design with the capital D began in the mid-19th century and ended, if you listen to me, last week. At some point in that century, the word changed from design being a description of what somebody does. I design to becoming a word which is a commodity you can buy. You can buy design. And my old mentor, boss, friend, antagonist, Terence Conran, was a master of this. Terence would say, this is design. And I would say, well, actually, Terence, it's not. It's just a pot. But when you say it's design, what you mean? What you mean is it's actually my taste. And this is the extraordinary thing, which is the difficulty of talking about design. Most people, when they talk about good design, they're not really talking about whether it's functional, whether it's cost efficient, whether it works well. What they're really saying is this is my taste.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, but I think it's when having taste is very important. But I think it's equally important to make the distinction between talking about design and taste.
They're trying to make objective a preference.
Yes. Well, Terence Conran's extraordinary career was based out of monetizing his own taste, which was I'm not mocking it. It was incredibly clever, and he did it extremely well. But Terence would go. We used to have the most. I was very close to him. We created the Boilerhouse project and the Design Museum together. But we used to have the most ferocious arguments because Terence was entirely intuitive, and I'm quite intuitive. But I've also been stained by academic education, so I have a certain amount of Terence would say to me, again, looking at this pot, he said, look, is this good design or not? And I said, well, Terence, it's not as simple as that. He said, make up your fucking mind. Is it good design or not? It was not as simple, it's not as simple, it's not as simple as that. But taste, taste is, I think, it's all of human life is about. No, I said it's about the pursuit of beauty, but it's all about taste, isn't it? It's about our preferences.
We're basically born, and then we just spend our entire lives sort of slightly reorganizing the world to fit what we believe is our taste. And they're all just minor reconfigurations of what's given to us and what's available to us and the things that we need.
Yes. Well, yes. Well, it is. But again, this is part of the whole adventure of being engaged in the material world. That it's about social competition and sort of cultural modelling, which I think that's great fun. I quite like a bit of social competition. I like I think we're betrayed. The things we own and want, the things we own or aspire to own, these things tell stories about us. Objects aren't mute. I've always been absolutely.
Well, every act of consumerism is an act of self-expression.
Absolutely.
As the goes.
Well, Henry Ford, of all people, he said anything that is made can be read like a book. It betrays and I passionately believe this, it betrays the beliefs and fears and doubts of the people who made it. And that, again, is part of why I think, even though I said the design with the capital D is over. Design with the small d is not over, because it's one of the great human enterprises, is sort of making things and then enjoying and using them and understanding them. It's learning to read objects, I think, is sort of absolutely fascinates me. I mean, I can just, I'm so happy just walking down a street, just looking at things and trying to understand how they how they work and how they convey meaning.
If good design offers people a method to express themselves in a way that they might not otherwise be able, how do you think, and we're moving away from valuing objects and beauty in that way,
Well,
how do you think we'll fill that need?
well,
What do you see?
The problem is, isn't it? Like, it's about too much beauty. I mean, too much good design is intolerable. One really doesn't. The awful prospect of living in a world totally designed by a Swedish architect in 1955 would be simply unbearable. But I don't know. As I said, I try to separate my own personal taste, which is very clear. At least it's very clear to me. I mean, I personally like spare environments and simple forms and chaste. I'm Henry David Thoreau and John Ruskin are sort of heroes of mine. I love it that Thoreau's coming onto luxury now.
You've fallen in love with that which you once found repugnant.
Yes. Well, have I?
Yeah, because I think the fascination often can invert what starts off as a sort of something.
I'm much more tolerant now. I did actually, because I was probably overzealous in my promotion of the modernist ideas in my early professional life. I did think they were all necessarily true. I'm much more tolerant now, and we live in. You said, do we have I ever now? Do I now enjoy things that I once thought repugnant? Part of why I think the great age of design is in one sense over is because everything is now, we can see, is really just a version of something else. You can see this in the dying motor industry. They're all just reissuing versions of something which existed before. I was actually talking.
I think it's one of the most depressing places to look, actually.
Yeah, well, I was just talking earlier this morning to the Renault's chief designer about a new car of his, which is, frankly, it's electric, so it's not the same as the petrol predecessor, but it's frankly, conceptually, it's a reboot of a 30-year-old design. Well, there are several things going on in the motor industry at the moment. They're all terrified of China, and China is obviously going to dominate the world.
Yeah,
motor sales, if it isn't already.
Well, you need a battery, a body kit, and a flat
will
screen.
do soon. And these are just absolutely faceless, charmless, uninteresting, perfectly adequate. They have no more character than a fridge, which is sort of fine. So the European and indeed American manufacturers are now just mining the past. It's the only thing they've got to separate themselves, from the Chinese. And the problem about this sort of repetition is you can only do it once for one generation. You can't keep on repeating. I asked a guy, his name's Lawrence van den Akker, who's Renault's chief designer. I said, "Does this mean? Do you think that novelty has come to an end? Have we run out of novelty in car design?" It was quite evasive about an answer. I think we might have done.
Is all art is all design just a remix?
Well, everything isn't all art, and all culture is just a.
Yeah.
It's a continuing. It's like that wonderful old saying about a building. You don't finish a building, you start it. All the great buildings are just accretions and built upon. I think. And the same with everything. But art is theft, isn't it? What's the famous old line about great Picasso or Eliot or one of those? Perhaps they both said it. Perhaps they both stole it from each other. They said, great artists don't borrow, they steal.
Yeah.
So that's fine. But about the thing about the I don't want to get into eco-politics. It's actually not my subject. A petrol or combustion engine could be diesel too. A combustion engine's got something like 10,000 measurable parameters going on in it, which and they can take 10,000 parameters, can take all sorts of forms and creates all sorts of character. Electromotors don't, and there's a reason why a little Fiat Cinquecento with a 2-cylinder air-cooled 600cc engine looks the way it does, and why a Ferrari 250 GTO, the world's most expensive car with a 3 4 litre V12 with 6 double-barreled Weber downdraft carburetors looks the way it does. Those engines have character and personality,
But
which find
presumably
expression in the.
our predecessors looked upon the mechanical age, with scorn, having moved from the true character of a sort of horse, for example, and so I'm always just asking myself, am I just resistant to change? How able am I to embrace change, and how does that become harder with age, and do you become harder to see things out of the cycle within which you live?
I certainly like being astonished, and in many respects, I'm open to challenge. Well, I like being challenged, but I think inevitably, as you get a little bit older, your opinions harden.
It does feel, sadly, like we are on the verge of a general disintegration of, I agree with you, of design. It's become so irrational to take the more charming path that it's almost unjustifiable.
I think it's over ever. We're in it. This is a moment of it's a genuine hiatus at the moment. I mean, that I said the great design with the capital D is an artistic movement, just more or less grinding to an end now, and we're in a very, very, very peculiar moment where people are uncertain about values and beliefs. And what was it? It wasn't G.K. Chesterton, didn't he say? I think it's something to do with the temporary disappearance of God. He said when people don't believe in God, it's not they don't believe in nothing; they believe in anything.
Yeah,
and that's what's sort of going on at the moment. People believe in almost anything.
Do you think it's possible to go back?
Yes. Not back in a sort of retrospective, nostalgic, sentimental sense, but I think human. I quite like analog civilization, and I don't mean just European I mean human. I like the world of statues, of sculptures, of architecture, of pictures, and that's why and that's how our great civilizations are remembered.
Yeah,
not by abstractions. They're remembered and enjoyed because of the physical artifacts they created, and I think that's absolutely fundamental to human existence.
the world of design always sits in juxtaposition to the world of luxury. They're close neighbors, I think.
Luxury. Well, luxury is a way of the history of the word luxury is quite interesting, isn't it? Because it
Great comfort and convenience.
Well, no, but I mean, first of all, it was about lechery and lust, wasn't it? And excess. I think sometime in the 18th century, it became to mean luxury was came to mean stuff which was desirable, but not indispensable. Stuff by definition which you could do without.
Yes.
And today's foremost luxury publication, the FT's How to Spend It, this could be an encyclopedia of things which are which are truly not indispensable. But luxury was just a way of, again, you said validation before. It's just another term of how to separate the ordinary from the dross, in the same way as the word design was used for a time, saying this is a design, this is a designer pot. The other pots aren't designed because the other ones were designed. They were just designs you didn't like. Isn't that what luxury has become? It's just a way of saying this is a superior product. I'm very interested in quality and quality experiences, and as told, if there are available superior experiences. Whether I said because I'm a Democrat, I want superior experiences to be more widely available. So in a sense, the luxury idea, in one sense, I find attractive because it is identifying pleasing, pleasing objects and experiences. But I also find it troubling because it's, by the same definition, it's sort of anti-democratic. But I also think it is about. It's going back now, isn't it, to the 18th century meaning of the pre-18th century meaning of it as vulgar excess. I mean, Coco Chanel said something wonderful once. She said, what was it? Luxury is not the opposite of poverty; it's the opposite of vulgarity, and that's what true luxury is. The Coco Chanel sort. I mean, beautiful, beautiful dresses which last forever.
She also said
which things which transcend the depredations of time, and that's. And
she also quite nicely, I think, at one point stated that luxury is when necessity ends.
Yes,
Which I thought was
yeah.
quite nicely put.
Well, yes, and I think that's absolutely. She was absolutely brilliant. So brilliant was she that my daughter's called Coco in her.
So is mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, there we are.
Yeah.
It was explicitly in honour of Coco Chanel in my case. But luxury, I asked Jonathan Ive a while ago what he felt luxury meant, and he said two interesting things. He said he felt it was just. He felt that that blinking, softly blinking light you get on Apple monitors, which shows that the thing's breathing. He said that's luxury because it's and he said it's luxury because it shows effort and care beyond what is necessary.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite a. And Jonathan Ives, if you ever met him, an obviously extremely interesting person.
I'd love to meet him.
But he is exceptionally interesting. He's very, 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 very. He's not just brilliant at what he does. He's very thoughtful and articulate individual.
What are some of the things in your life that you really value, that you love? Some of the objects that you hold dear?
Very few. When you come to my house, you'll see there's very, 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 very few things.
Really?
I mean, very, 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 very few. Issey Miyake came to our house when we soon after we'd moved in, and we actually didn't have any carpet then because we couldn't afford it. We'd have carpet now because we don't like carpet. We didn't have any lights in those days. We couldn't afford lights. We had candles, and Issey thought it was a wonderful Zen statement of something it wasn't at all. It just meant we actually had no money at all. There's very little to which very few things to which objects to which I'm deeply attached.
How have you over your career and as you've matured, changed your concept of value?
I think I've got old rather than matured.
Got older.
So, yeah. Maturity, something else. No, I don't. Bad object, but I daily get infuriated when I lose my favourite pen, which I do routinely. I run around the house screaming at my wife and saying I've lost my Mont Blanc, and she think, oh, not again. And I find so I'm attached to it that way. But I can buy another Mont Blanc next week if I want. No, the only thing. The only thing which is somebody asked I think it was somebody asked Jackson Pollock what would he save if it was it wasn't. It was somebody asked John Cocteau what would he save if his house was burning down, and Cocteau said I'd save the fire. which I loved. And the only thing I'd save, apart from my wife and children and grandchildren, the only thing I'd save if our house was burning down, I've got a 17th century picture, Florentine picture of the death of St. Francis, or St. Francis receiving the stigmata. And that's the sole object which I rush into a blazing house to save.
I'm going to assume the style of your house is not overly modern.
It's just very neutral. My wife is a very skilled graphic designer and interior designer. But we've never bought anything which we don't genuinely like or want or need.
Is your wife's personality the diametric opposite of yours, or are you quite similar?
We have similar taste, which is one of the reasons we get on so well, because we have similar taste. We were both working for Terence Conran.
Really?
And that assumes, at the time, certainly at the time we were met, assumed a certain level of commonality in one's beliefs.
What was Terence like to work with?
Absolute nightmare.
Really?
I liked him a lot, but he was also extremely difficult. Even his best friends would say extremely difficult.
Yeah.
It's an enduring mystery for me that how someone who genuinely believed in good things, he believed in much what I'm like a poor man's Terence Conran, the things I was saying. I believe that everybody would be happier if they enjoyed their teapot or their chair and their whatever. How someone who genuinely believed in good things could also be so what an absolute total shit at the same time. Can't quite square it.
Yeah.
He could be very, very, very. I mean, he could be cruelly unpleasant.
Yeah.
He studied unpleasantness and genuinely liked tormenting and people. And yet at the same time, his belief in the importance of you and me having a nice chair and a nice teapot was real. Yeah. I can't square that.
That's fascinating.
Never will. One thing it'll be the last word I'll ever say on Terence, but it's one thing no one ever said about Terence. No one ever said Terence Conran, what a boring man. I said lots of other things. Maybe like people said there are people who know Terence and people who like Terence, and they're very rarely the same person. But I liked him a lot, actually. We were very close.
What would you change, Stephen, about your industry?
Well, I think it's changing itself. It's sort of not mine, it was theirs. I've only ever really been an observer. I think there's serious demand for better quality buildings in this country, but we're probably going to build fewer new buildings in future. And I think creative reuse is becoming ever more important. And I think the change I'd want to make is some awareness of government that I would just like to see that government, for as long as we have governments like we've got governments, should take more responsibility for the the physical environment.
It actually started the sort of thing which, as I've got older, and you watch skylines change, just started making me really angry.
I don't like tall buildings, and I've got fear of heights, but I don't mind that. It's a sign of prosperity. But what I do find absolutely appalling, the housing problem we have in this country could be solved overnight if governments and local councils, local authorities decided to reuse some of the redundant buildings, factories and civic buildings around. I was up in Leicester the other day in Hull doing my building awards thing. I mean, someone like Leicester is full of fabulously impressive Victorian buildings which are empty. And they're trying to let them commercially. They're never going to be let commercially because businesses don't need premises like that. They could be turned into housing overnight. And every city in this country is the same. It could be done.
Yeah.
But no, for some reason, no one does it. I just do not understand.
Yeah. Bureaucracy.
And wouldn't it be wonderful if you do that? You bring life back to the city centre of places like Leicester and help people have a lovely place to live. And it doesn't. That's
it really is a shame.
I dislike to. If I had a gun, I'd use it on the people responsible for for not making these decisions and just not having the vision. It's an aesthetic thing. It's just not actually seeing that these things could happen. I love that thing Picasso said. If you can imagine something, it's already real. And I can imagine. So you ask what I'd like to change. Not my industry, but the world I work in. It's just that awareness that we could make. I mean, in this country, our major cities are London's a world's one of the great cities of the world. Our secondary cities are great places too. Glasgow, Edinburgh, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, Newcastle. But we have this terrible problem with the tertiary cities. Places like Leicester, Hull, Derby, which are presently, frankly, hopeless. There's no economic case for their existence, but there could be. If the responsible parties, whether locally or nationally, would just do something about it.
Stephen, what concerns you about the world that we're leaving the next generation?
Well, I'm not too much concerns me really, because as I said, I'm without trying to cringe make, I'm basically optimistic. I mean, there are obviously huge problems. We know what they are. The growth of the population in Africa because driven by migrants, driven by poverty and economic and economic necessity. About that. The rise of aggressive despots all over the world. We know about this, but I think I think the human. Sorry, you're making me sound like a philosopher. I think the human achievements are sort of the best of them, absolutely magisterial, and I think people will, human beings will survive.
If you had to give up what you do today and do something totally different, what
I'd
do
like
you do?
I'd like to be a suntanned, whip-thin tennis coach.
That's the best answer. Yeah,
but it's also true. I'm not going to be any of those things. I might get suntanned if I go away again.
What sports do you
Tennis. Well, I run as well, but
Yeah.
I run badly, but I've been running forever. I love running.
Yeah. What's for you personally? What's the most exciting thing in the next 5 years?
Survival.
And on that note, Stephen, thank you very much for your time. It's been a joy.
Well, it's been a great talking to you too.
Thank you.